It has been reported by John Percy of The Telegraph that Nat Phillips is a player on the list for Derby County heading into next season. And it's obviously a very, very good move by John Eustace to go and pick up the defender from Liverpool. Now, obviously, when we look at Nat Phillips, we know this season hasn't necessarily all gone to plan, but we know coming into the back end of the season, he has been one of the most important players, and he scored the most important goal of the season with that goal at Hull City. But is he a player who Derby County need to take themselves forward next season? Now, in my opinion, Derby County's defence has not been a problem over the course of the last 12 months, even when Paul Warne was in charge. And obviously, we all know that Derby County need a lot more creativity. They need a lot more in that sort of forward line, whether it be strikers, wingers, and that's where we sort of need to aim our focus this summer. But ultimately, Derby County are left with only three senior players at the club in that centre-back position. I say three, but ultimately it is actually only two, with Sondre Langas and Curtis Nelson. Obviously, Jake Rooney also sits in there as well, but Rooney hasn't really had a look in under John Eustace. So you look at this potential signing of Nat Phillips, and obviously we can talk about the potential contract extension of Matt Clark, which, as I am recording this video, has not been confirmed yet. And I do believe that Nat Phillips would be a very, very good signing to keep him with Derby County next season. I think if we look at how he's handled the second half of this season under John Eustace, I think he's been probably one of our standout performers. And I do believe that had Nat Phillips played earlier, I think he would have had a much, much better season. And I think he probably would have been in the running for sort of that Player of the Season award from the fan base. And obviously we know that ended up with Ibu Adams. But for me, I think Nat Phillips has been a very, very good performer. And the big question that's really going to be about Nat Phillips is that sort of wage. Obviously, if we look at his wage bill at Liverpool, it's currently sitting at around £65,000 per week, allegedly, according to rumours. But obviously, we know he's a very, very good player. And Derby County won't be offering 65 grand a week. And there will be teams in the Championship that will be willing to offer that. Now, I think the only thing that sort of stands well for us heading into this potential transfer is the fact that obviously Nat Phillips really in the Championship, he's only really been involved in those sort of bottom end of the table. I believe he was at Cardiff last season before this one, and then obviously with Derby in this one. So he's not necessarily got that sort of experience at the top end of the division. So is it sort of going to be something that a Southampton or a Leicester or an Ipswich may look at? It may well be, but I think when it comes to Nat Phillips, yes, he had those really good performances for Liverpool, but ultimately in the Championship, it hasn't always clicked for him, although I think he's been absolutely brilliant for Derby County, do not get me wrong. So it's one of those where I do think there's going to be lots of people at the table. I think the positive for Derby is that we could have been having these conversations and talking to him about next season for the last few weeks. Obviously, John Eustace could be, as I'm recording this video right now, could be sat with him discussing what the future potentially looks like for him and what Derby County are wanting to do heading into next season. Obviously, there will be a few changes for Derby when it comes to sort of maybe style of play, maybe formations, and does that sort of suit what Nat Phillips wants to do? Does Nat Phillips suit what John Eustace wants to do? And they're all going to be questions that are going to head the way of Nat Phillips. And obviously, when we look at the back line that we've been playing, obviously it's Langas or Fozzie with Clark and Nat Phillips. I think it's been a really, really good back line, and I think it's done a really good job across the course of the second half of this season. Obviously, I think if you look at the form table for the last 10 games, 11 games or whatever it is, I think we sit fourth in the division, which is obviously unbelievable. When you look at the performances of earlier in the season and you look at how Derby County were sort of mid-season as well, where we picked up no points in, 9 games, I think it was, maybe 8 games, something like that. It just shows how quickly the Championship can turn. And I do believe that next season, I'm not trying to get ahead of myself, but I think that John Eustace will put us in a really good stead. And I think at minimum we'll finish mid-table. I think best case scenario, we may even be in that sort of playoff push. Obviously, a lot depends on the work we do in the transfer window, which is why I don't really want to get ahead of myself now. Because if we look at the squad on paper right now, it isn't really good enough, and we've got a lot of work to do to get it to that position. But Nat Phillips would obviously be an excellent addition. We all know how good Nat Phillips has been, especially you Derby County fans that have been at the games, those that have watched the games, you'll know how good Nat Phillips is. And I know that there's a lot of people that were sort of, I don't know if many people were 50-50 on the signing in the first place, but it was sort of one of them deals which sort of felt like it was the right deal to get done, but he should have been playing earlier. And ultimately, I think that because Paul Warne didn't play him earlier, it put a bit of a shadow of doubt over Nat Phillips. And I think realistically, the best thing that happened for Derby County this season, well, the two best things that happened for Derby County, was Erin Cashin being sold and Paul Warne being moved on. And I'm not saying that Cashin wasn't a good defender. I'm not saying he wouldn't have been great under John Eustace, because he may well have been. But that gave us the opportunity to bring in Langas. It gave us the position where we could play Nat Phillips again. Obviously, then Curtis Nelson had his injury, which meant we brought in Matt Clark as well. And so much changed in such a short period of time. And I actually think those changes benefited Derby in the long run. Would it have benefited Derby under Paul Warne? That's a question which I can't exactly answer right now. But for Derby, there's masses and masses of things that they can do next season with John Eustace. And I think when you look at some of the players that are out of contract, you look at some of the players who could be available on loan next season. And obviously, you look at some of the clubs that have that are in the Premier League that have sort of players on the periphery. You look at a Harrison Armstrong, who is going to be on the periphery of that Everton senior squad, and that'll probably open the door for him to come back to Derby. And you've got these sort of conversations that you can be having about a Nat Phillips who's out of contract, a Harrison Armstrong who may be available. You've got a Marcus Harness who I believe is out of contract to Ipswich. Obviously, you've then got the conversations about someone like Jerry Yates, who ultimately probably isn't going to be in the plans of Swansea City, but we'll obviously have to wait and see how that transpires. Now, when it comes to Nat Phillips, would I put an offer in? Would I sign him? Now, obviously, we're all waiting for investment. And I know people tell me not to say, obviously, but if you've been following Derby County for a long time, you'll know that over the past 12 months, investment has been a massive talking point, potential takeovers and things like that. And I think that any deals we do this summer is purely going to be dependent on when and how that comes. Obviously, as I'm recording this right now, we don't have any news on that. We don't have any updates. All we know is that, according to John Percy, those talks will accelerate. Now, will those talks accelerate and mean that a player like Nat Phillips suddenly becomes affordable for Derby County? I don't know, because the most important thing is that I'm not saying we need to go out and spend 20, 30 million next season. That is absolutely not my point, but we have to spend money. We spent, 10 million? Well, we spent like 10 million this season, but we bought in about 15, 20 when you bring in salon fees and cash in and letting go of Collins' wages and probably a portion of Bradley's as well. You look at Fauna going out. Like, you've got all these sort of wages that we were able to get rid of and things like that. And I think that the most important thing heading into this summer is making sure that we do the right things when it comes to budgets, when it comes to wage bills, when it comes to transfer fees. And I'm not saying that Derby County should stick to this positive net spend that we've been in over the course of the last few seasons, but we certainly need to spend some money, and we need to make sure that we put our names on the block, essentially, because we were lucky this season, very lucky. And if we look at that and think, success, then we're going to have some huge problems next season. And I don't think John Eustace will allow that to happen. I don't think the players will either. You heard Ibu Adams after the game. Well, if you didn't, he said he doesn't want to be involved in anything like that ever again. So I think it's really important for Derby County to bring in the right players. I think Nat Phillips would be part of that right player criteria. I think he's shown this back end of the season that he's a very, very good championship defender. So if we can get that deal done, I'll be absolutely delighted. But you can let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If you have not done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to stay tuned for all of my latest Derby County content. There will be a season review out next Friday, probably, where I'm going to discuss everything from the season, all my sort of talking points and thoughts across the course of the season, whether it be Paul Warne, the way we started the season, going through each month and things like that. I'll give my position for Player of the Year, Young Player of the Year and things like that, and also take a look at some players who could potentially step up to Derby County next season. But that will be coming next Friday around 6 p.m, so make sure you've hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to stay tuned for that one, and I'll catch you in the next one.